I stood at the glass doors of the Sterling Foundation gala, watching through my own reflection as my former family gathered around my replacement like moths to a flame. The chandeliers cast their faces in gold, but I saw only the cracks beneath their polished smiles. My hand rested steady on the door handle. No trembling, no hesitation. The girl who used to beg for their attention had died 3 years ago. I was simply here to watch them realize it. My phone buzzed. Another message from my mother. The 7th one this week. I didn't open it. There was a time when a single message from Victoria Sterling would have sent me running. Now, the number on my screen meant nothing more than confirmation that my absence had finally registered. 3 years too late. The valet approached, asking if I needed anything. I smiled and shook my head, then turned and walked back to my car. I wasn't here to go inside. I was here to prove to myself that I could walk away. Again. In my first life, I died at 28 in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and regret. No family surrounded my bed. No hands held mine. The nurses were kind, but they were paid to be. I remember staring at the ceiling tiles, counting them for the 100th time, thinking about how I'd spent my entire existence trying to earn love from people who had already decided I wasn't worth it. The Sterlings adopted me when I was 6, after their biological daughter Lily was born. They needed someone to make Lily look better by comparison. I didn't understand that then. I thought I was lucky. I thought I'd been chosen. My mother, Victoria, was a socialite who collected children like she collected art, for display, not attachment. My father, Richard, was a corporate lawyer who measured worth in billable hours and return on investment. I was neither decorative enough nor profitable enough to matter. But Lily was perfect. She had my mother's eyes and my father's sharp mind. She played piano like an angel and spoke 3 languages by age 10. Every room she entered became hers. Every conversation bent toward her orbit. And I was the shadow they kept around to remind themselves how exceptional she was. I tried everything. I studied until my eyes burned, won academic awards they never attended ceremonies for, learned to cook their favourite meals that went uneaten, while they praised whatever takeout Lily ordered. I stayed up late helping Lily with her homework while she played games on her phone. I covered for her when she snuck out, lied to my parents about where she was, took punishment meant for her mistakes. Emma's always been so responsible, my mother would say, not as praise, but as fact, like I was a piece of furniture performing its function. When I was 16, I overheard them talking in my father's study. The door was cracked open, and I'd come downstairs for water. My mother's voice carried clearly. "Should we tell Emma about the trust fund situation?" My father's papers rustled. "Why? She'll go to college on scholarships anyway. She's good at that. Lily needs the financial support more. Her talents require investment. And Emma doesn't? Emma's talent is surviving. She doesn't need our money for that." I stood frozen in the hallway, glass in hand. The water I'd wanted suddenly seemed impossible to swallow. That night, I understood. I wasn't their daughter. I was their insurance policy against looking like bad people. As long as I existed in their home, they could say they'd given an orphan a chance. What I did with that chance was irrelevant. But I kept trying, because what else did I know? At 18, I got into Stanford on a full scholarship. They forgot to come to my graduation. Lily had a piano recital the same day. At 22, I finished my master's degree in biotechnology. They sent a card, generic, no name signed, just printed text. That same month, they threw Lily a party for getting cast in a community theatre production. I worked 3 jobs while completing my PhD, sent money home when my father's firm had a bad quarter, paid for Lily's car when she crashed her first one, covered my mother's credit card bills when her shopping got out of hand. They never said thank you. They said things like, family helps family, and you're so good at managing finances. Then came the diagnosis: autoimmune disease, aggressive. I was 26. My body was attacking itself from the inside, and the medical bills piled up faster than I could work. I called my father from the hospital after my first major treatment, explained the situation, asked for the first time in my life if they could help. Emma, you know Lily's opening her boutique this year. All our capital is tied up in that. Can't you apply for patient assistance programs? You've always been good at paperwork. I hung up before he finished his sentence. The next 2 years were a blur of pain and treatments I could barely afford. My research position let me work from home on bad days. I published papers that got attention in my field. None of my family read them. When Lily's boutique failed within 6 months, my parents covered her losses without question. $250,000, more than my entire medical debt. I stopped calling. They didn't notice. 3 months before I died, Lily got engaged to a man named Owen. Successful, handsome, from a good family. My mother called me for the first time in 14 months to tell me I was expected at the engagement party. Not invited, expected. Wear something nice, Emma. Not those awful cardigans you always wear. This is important for Lily's future mother-in-law to see family unity. I went. Because even dying, even knowing it was futile, some part of me hoped they'd look at me and finally see what they'd missed. I wore a simple navy dress that I'd splurged on, did my makeup carefully to hide how sick I looked. When I arrived, my mother glanced at me and frowned. Oh, Emma, navy? Really? That's Lily's colour. Go change. There was nothing to change into. I stood in the bathroom of their country club, staring at my reflection, realising I'd driven 2 hours while feeling barely strong enough to walk, all to be told I'd worn the wrong colour. I left without saying goodbye. No one noticed for 3 hours. My mother's angry voicemail was the last message I ever received from them. I was being selfish, she said, embarrassing, ungrateful. Did I know how much they'd sacrificed to raise me? I deleted it. 5 weeks later, I collapsed in my apartment. Neighbours found me 36 hours afterward. By the time I reached the hospital, my body was shutting down. I spent my last 3 days conscious but unable to speak, listening to machines beep and nurses whisper that it was sad, so young, and no family listed in the emergency contacts. The last thing I thought before the darkness came was relief. At least I wouldn't have to try anymore. Then I woke up. I was 14 again. In my childhood bedroom in the Sterling house, with pale yellow walls I'd never been allowed to repaint, and furniture chosen by my mother that I'd never liked. My phone showed September 15th, 14 years earlier. The date burned in my memory because it was 2 days before Lily's 14th birthday party, the one where I'd organised everything while she complained about the decorations I'd spent weeks planning. I sat up slowly, touching my face, my arms, my chest. Young, healthy, no pain. My hands weren't scarred from IV lines. My body didn't ache with the exhaustion of disease. I could breathe deeply without my lungs protesting. For 10 minutes, I didn't move. I ran through every possibility. Dream, hallucination, death-induced fantasy. But the weight of memory was too complete, too perfect. I remembered 14 years of future that hadn't happened yet. Every betrayal, every dismissal, every moment I'd been erased so Lily could shine brighter. And I remembered dying alone. Something in my chest turned to stone. Not anger, not grief. Something colder and more permanent. A decision that settled into my bones like winter. This time would be different. Not because I would fight them or confront them or make them see me, but because I would stop trying. I would stop performing the role of grateful adopted daughter. I would stop being the person who made their neglect possible. I would leave them so completely, They'd forget I'd ever been there at all. And then, when they needed me, I'd already be gone. The thought brought the first smile I'd felt in years. That morning at breakfast, I watched them with new eyes. My mother fussed over Lily's outfit for school, debating between 2 designer dresses. My father read the financial pages, occasionally grunting agreement to whatever my mother said. I ate my cereal in silence, but not the desperate silence of someone hoping to be noticed. The peaceful silence of someone observing strangers. "Emma, after school you'll pick up Lily's cake from the bakery," my mother said without looking up. "I'm getting my hair done." In my old life, I'd said yes immediately, rearranged my plans, cancelled a study group I'd been looking forward to. "No," I said quietly. The kitchen went still. My mother's head turned slowly, like a predator who'd heard unexpected movement. "Excuse me? I have plans after school. I can't pick up the cake." "What plans could you possibly have that are more important than your sister's birthday? Study group for my chemistry test?" A lie. I had no test, but I needed them to learn immediately that my time was no longer theirs to allocate. My father lowered his paper. "Emma, don't be difficult. Your mother asked you to do something." "I'm not being difficult. I'm telling you I'm not available." Lily stared at me like I'd grown a second head. She was so young, 14 years old, still believing she was the centre of the universe because our parents had spent her entire life confirming it. I felt nothing looking at her. No resentment, no envy, just distance. "Fine," my mother said, her voice sharp. "I suppose I'll do it myself, though I don't know where you learned this selfish attitude." I didn't respond. I finished my cereal, rinsed my bowl, and left for school. Behind me, I heard my mother hiss something to my father about teenagers and phases. Let them think it was a phase. They'd understand eventually. Over the next 6 months, I systematically dismantled every connection that tied me to the Sterling family. It wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. I stopped doing Lily's homework. The first time she came to my room with her laptop and that expectant smile, I told her I was busy. She looked shocked, then annoyed, then left in a huff. Her grades dropped. My parents assumed she was distracted by normal teenage things and hired her a tutor. I stopped covering for Lily's parties and secret boyfriends. When my parents asked where she was, I told the truth. "I don't know. I'm not her keeper." The first time Lily got caught sneaking back in at 2 a.m, my mother screamed at her for an hour. Lily came to my room afterward crying, asking why I didn't text her that they were awake. "You didn't ask me to," I said calmly. "And even if you had, I wouldn't have. That's your responsibility, not mine." She called me a bitch and slammed my door. I felt nothing. I stopped attending their events unless explicitly required. When my mother expected me to help host her charity luncheon, I signed up for a weekend volunteer program at a research lab instead. When my father needed someone to play golf with his client's daughter, I had already committed to a coding workshop. They grew frustrated with my unavailability, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what had changed. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't acting out. I was just absent. Most importantly, I stopped taking their money. Every dollar they gave me for lunch, clothes or activities went into a savings account I opened at a bank they didn't use. I got a part-time job at a bookstore, then tutoring, then freelance coding. At 14, almost 15, my income options were limited, but I was resourceful. I always had been. I just hadn't been using those skills for myself. By the time I was 16, I had enough saved for a security deposit on an apartment and 6 months of rent. I researched emancipation laws. I documented every instance of neglect, not for revenge, but for legal protection. I was patient, methodical, and completely uninterested in their approval. They noticed my withdrawal the way you notice a lamp has burned out, dimly, with vague annoyance, but no urgency to fix it. I was becoming what I'd always been to them, a background presence. The difference was, now I was doing it on purpose. The shift happened at my 16th birthday, or rather, the lack of one. In my previous life, they'd forgotten it entirely. I'd come home from school to an empty house and spent the evening alone. When my mother returned at 9 p.m. from Lily's debate team celebration dinner, she'd looked surprised to see me sitting in the kitchen. "Oh, Emma, was today something?" This time I didn't wait around to be forgotten. I spent my 16th birthday at the research lab where I'd been volunteering for the past year. Dr. Patricia Chen was a biotech researcher who'd taken interest in my work ethic and curiosity. She was the first adult who'd ever seen me as more than a supporting character in someone else's story. "Happy birthday, Emma," she said that afternoon, handing me a small wrapped package. Inside was a journal with my name embossed on the leather cover. "I've watched you take notes on scraps of paper for months. You deserve better." I held that journal like it was made of gold, not because it was expensive, it wasn't, but because someone had thought of me. As me, not as Lily's sister or the Sterling's adopted project. Just Emma. "Thank you," I managed, and my voice cracked on both words. Dr. Chen smiled. "You're going to do remarkable things. I hope you know that." I didn't, not yet, but I was starting to believe it might be possible. That night, I came home at 8 p.m. to find my mother in the kitchen, looking irritated. "Where have you been? I needed you to help Lily with her college application essays." "It's my birthday," I said quietly. My mother blinked, looked at the calendar on her phone. Her face didn't change. No guilt, no embarrassment, no apology. Just a slight tightening around her mouth. "Well, you're 16 now, practically an adult. I'm sure you don't need us making a fuss anymore." "I never needed a fuss. I just needed you to remember." I walked past her to my room. Behind me, I heard her mutter something about melodrama. I didn't care anymore. The realization was liberating. I'd spent my first life desperate for crumbs of their attention. In this life, I was learning to feed myself. At 17, I graduated high school a year early. Perfect grades, multiple scholarship offers, early admission to several prestigious universities. The day I received my acceptance letter to MIT with a full ride plus stipend, I walked downstairs to find my parents celebrating in the living room. For a moment, my old instincts flared. They were proud of me. Finally. Then I saw the champagne bottle label. "Congratulations, Lily, NYU drama program." My father noticed me in the doorway. "Oh, Emma, good, you're here. You can take photos of us with Lily." I held up my own envelope. "I got into MIT, full scholarship." My mother glanced over, smiled vaguely. "That's nice, dear. Can you get your phone? The lighting is better with yours." Something I'd carefully protected during my transformation. Some small, hidden hope I hadn't known still existed. Finally, died. It didn't hurt. It just ended. "Congratulations, Lily," I said genuinely. My sister had worked hard for NYU, in her own way. Her success wasn't the problem. Their inability to hold space for both of us was. I took their photos, smiled when directed. Then I went upstairs and started planning my departure with the same careful attention I'd applied to everything else in my new life. 3 months later, I left for MIT a week before Lily left for NYU. I didn't ask them to drive me. I packed what I needed into 3 suitcases, arranged my own transportation, and walked out of the Sterling house on a Tuesday morning while they were all still asleep. I left a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to Boston. Will contact when settled." My mother called once, 2 days after I left. "Emma, you were supposed to help Lily pack. She's very upset." Lily is 18 years old and going to college. I'm sure she can manage her own packing. This is exactly the kind of selfish behaviour. I hung up. She didn't call again. MIT was where I stopped being the girl who'd been erased and became the woman who refused to be seen. I threw myself into research with an intensity that worried even my driven classmates. But I wasn't running from pain anymore. I was running towards something. Purpose. Independence. A future I was building with my own hands. Dr. Chen had connected me with colleagues at MIT. I worked in 3 different labs, published my first paper at 18, filed my first patent at 19. My research focused on regenerative cellular therapy, the kind of work that might have saved my life in my previous timeline. Every breakthrough felt like writing over the past. The Sterlings called twice a year, once at Christmas, once on my birthday, which they now remembered because Facebook reminded them. The conversations were brief and followed the same script. How's school? Good. Are you eating well? Yes. Lily's doing wonderfully. She got a part in an off-Broadway production. That's great. Well, we just wanted to check in. Thanks. They never asked what I was working on. Never inquired about my research or my papers or my patents. I was still just performing my function, being the responsible one who required no maintenance. The difference was, I no longer needed their attention to survive. At 20, I was recruited by a biotech startup in Boston. They'd read my research and wanted me to lead their new regenerative medicine division. The salary was more than my parents had ever spent on me in my entire first life. I bought a small apartment in Cambridge with large windows and minimal furniture. It was mine, every inch of it chosen by me, for me. I sent my family a change of address card. My mother texted back, "So formal. You're always so independent, Emma." Yes, I wanted to reply, because you taught me that depending on you was fatal. But I didn't. I just lived my life. The unravelling began 2 years later during Lily's Saturn return, though she'd never have known to call it that. I was 23, deep in clinical trial preparations for our company's flagship regenerative therapy. My life was consumed with research protocols and FDA applications. I barely followed social media, which is why I didn't know about Lily's crisis until 3 months after it started. My phone rang at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. But 23 years of conditioning, even weakened, still existed somewhere in my nervous system. Hello? Emma? My mother's voice was ragged, unfamiliar. We need your help. Those 4 words. The ones they'd never spoken before. In my previous life, I'd longed to hear them. In this one, they landed like stones. What's wrong? It's Lily. She's had a breakdown. She's in psychiatric care. We don't know what to do. I sat up slowly, turned on my bedside lamp. What happened? The story came out in fractured pieces. Lily's acting career hadn't taken off after college. The rejections piled up. She'd started drinking too much, partying too hard, making increasingly erratic decisions. She'd burned through her trust fund in 3 years, gotten involved with a man who'd used her for money and connections, then left, developed an eating disorder. Finally, she'd had a complete mental breakdown in the middle of an audition, screaming at the directors that they were all conspiring against her. The doctors say she needs intensive treatment, my mother whispered. It's very expensive. Your father's firm has been struggling, and we've already spent so much trying to help her career. I understood before she finished. They were asking for money. How much? 200,000 for the 6-month residential program they're recommending. I did the math instantly. I had it. Between my salary, my patent licensing deals, and my careful investments, I could write that check without destroying myself. The old Emma would have. The Emma who died alone would have seen this as the opportunity to finally be needed, but I wasn't her anymore. "No," I said quietly. Silence. Then, "What?" "I'm not giving you money for Lily's treatment." "Emma, she's your sister. She needs help." "She's your daughter. You've spent her entire life telling her she's exceptional while giving her nothing real to build on. You threw money at her dreams without teaching her discipline. You praised her natural talents without showing her how to work. And now that the world didn't hand her success on a platter, she's breaking, and you want me to fix it. How dare you?" "I'm not finished." My voice stayed level, calm. "You have a house worth over $2 million. You have retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and assets you could liquidate. You could refinance, downsize, sell the vacation home you use twice a year, but you don't want to sacrifice your comfort. You want me to sacrifice mine. Again. We raised you. You housed me. There's a difference. And I've spent 7 years learning exactly what that difference costs. You're going to let your sister suffer because you're bitter about your childhood. I'm going to let you face the consequences of your parenting. Lily's mental health is tragic, and I hope she gets help. But I'm not responsible for fixing what you broke." I hung up. My hands were steady. My heart rate was normal. I felt no guilt, no second-guessing, no urge to call back and apologize, just clarity. I blocked my mother's number, then my father's, then Lily's. I changed my email, updated my address to a PO box, and went back to sleep. The calls came anyway, through work and colleagues and every connection they could find. My father tried appealing to family duty. My mother tried guilt. Lily tried tears. They sent emails full of accusations and pleas, each one revealing exactly how much they'd never understood me. After everything we gave you, they'd given me a room and resentment. I'd given them compliance and gratitude and the cover of respectability. We were even. "You're being cruel." I was being clear. Cruelty would have been helping just enough to keep them dependent. I was closing the door completely. The Emma we raised would never. The Emma they raised died at 28. They just hadn't noticed. 3 months passed. I heard through a former family friend who didn't know we weren't in contact that my parents had sold their vacation home and borrowed against their primary residence. Lily was in treatment. The shame of it, the friend said, was eating my mother alive. How did things get so bad? Why hadn't they seen the signs? I could have told them. The signs had been there for years, but signs only matter to people who are paying attention. 6 months after my mother's call, my research team successfully completed phase 2 clinical trials. The results were extraordinary. We had major pharmaceutical companies offering partnerships. My name appeared in journals and conferences. I was 23 years old and being called a rising star in regenerative medicine. The same week our results published, I received a letter from my father. Not an email. A physical letter forwarded through my company. He must have worked to find the address. It was 2 pages long, single-spaced. He'd written about disappointment and betrayal, about how they'd given me opportunities and I'd repaid them with abandonment, about how they'd finally seen my true character, selfish, cold, ungrateful. He hoped I was happy with my choice. He hoped I could live with myself, knowing I'd turned my back on family when they needed me most. The letter ended. "You are no longer welcome in this house or in this family. Do not contact us again. As far as we're concerned, we have one daughter, and it's not you." I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it in my filing cabinet and labelled it Formal Severance. It might be useful someday for legal purposes. Then I made tea and went back to work. They'd finally done what I'd been doing for 7 years. They'd left me. The relief was profound. 2 years later, I received the message that changed everything. I was 25, preparing to launch our company's first commercial therapy. The work was consuming, exhilarating, exactly what I'd built my second life toward. My apartment was bigger now, filled with plants and books and art I'd chosen because it spoke to me, not because it matched a decorator's vision. The message came through LinkedIn, of all places. From Owen, Lily's ex-fiancé from my previous timeline. Except in this timeline, they'd never gotten engaged. They'd never even dated. "Hi, Emma," the message read. "I know this is strange, but I saw your research publication on cellular regeneration. I'm working in developmental biology, and I think our work might align. Would you be interested in discussing potential collaboration?" I stared at the message for a long time. In my previous life, Owen had been at Lily's engagement party, smiling and holding her hand, while I stood in the wrong colour dress. He'd been part of the perfect picture my parents had been painting. But that timeline was gone, erased. This Owen was different, or rather, he was the same person, just meeting me in a completely different context. Not as Lily's sister, but as Dr. Emma Sterling, researcher and inventor. I responded professionally. We scheduled a video call. He was brilliant, kind, genuinely excited about the intersection of our work. We started collaborating on a research paper. 3 months later, he asked if I wanted to get coffee in person. He was visiting Boston for a conference. "I should tell you," I said during that first coffee, "that this might be complicated." "How so?" "You may have heard of the Sterlings, Victoria and Richard." Recognition flickered across his face. "The socialites. I've met them at a few fundraisers. Not particularly impressive." "Why?" "They're my adoptive parents, or were. We're estranged." "I see." He stirred his coffee. "Does that complicate things for you?" "I'm not sure yet. It might." "Well," he said, meeting my eyes, "I'm interested in you, Emma, not your family or their connections, just you and your brilliant mind and the way you explained cellular memory theory like it was poetry." Something in my chest unlocked. Not the desperate relief of finally being chosen. Something quieter and more solid. Being seen. We took it slow. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into long walks, discussing research and life and the peculiar weight of family expectations. He'd grown up with his own version of pressure, different but equally suffocating. We understood each other's choice to build new lives. 6 months after our first coffee, we presented our collaborative research at an international conference. The response was overwhelming. 2 more pharmaceutical companies approached us about partnerships. Our work was going to help people. Standing on that stage, answering questions from brilliant minds who'd read our paper and found it valuable, I had a thought I'd never had before. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Not despite my past, but because I'd learned from it. The girl who'd spent her first life seeking validation from people incapable of giving it had become a woman who created her own meaning. The difference was everything. The collapse came quickly once it started. I learned about it not from my family, but from the news. Richard Sterling, prominent attorney, under investigation for embezzlement. Multiple clients claiming misappropriation of funds. The firm he'd built his reputation on was imploding, and the evidence suggested he'd been stealing for years to maintain a lifestyle he could no longer afford. My mother's face appeared in tabloid photos, looking gaunt and years older than her age. She'd had to sell the Sterling house, move into a modest apartment. Her charity positions had evaporated. The society friends had vanished. And Lily. Lily had completed treatment, but her recovery was fragile. The tabloid attention from our father's scandal triggered a relapse. She was hospitalized again. According to the articles, Victoria Sterling was spending every day at her daughter's bedside, looking haunted. My old co-worker sent me a link to a particularly brutal article. "Isn't this your family? Are you okay?" I read it carefully. The journalist had been thorough. They'd traced the family's decline, interviewed former friends, connected dots. The portrait that emerged was devastating. A family that had built itself on image rather than substance, on borrowed money and borrowed status, collapsing under the weight of its own pretense. The article mentioned me in one paragraph. The Sterling's adopted daughter, Dr. Emma Sterling, is notably absent from the scandal. She severed contact with the family years ago and has built a successful career in biotech research. Attempts to reach her for comment were unsuccessful. I thought about that for a long time. The old Emma would have felt guilty, would have wondered if she could have prevented this somehow, would have been pulled back into trying to fix the unfixable. But I'd learned in my first death that you can't save people from themselves. You can only decide who you're going to be in response to them. I didn't call. I didn't send money. I didn't reach out. I just kept living my life. The confrontation I'd been avoiding came 3 months later. I was at a medical conference in New York presenting on our latest trial results. The work was going well. Owen and I were planning to publish a book together on cellular regeneration. Life was full and meaningful and mine. After my presentation, I went to the hotel bar for a quiet drink before bed. And there, sitting in the corner booth, was my mother. She'd aged a decade in 3 years. Grey hair she'd once dyed religiously, lines carved deep around her mouth and eyes. Clothes that were nice but not designer, worn in a way that suggested she'd had them for years. She was staring into a glass of wine like it held answers. I could have left. Should have, probably. But something in me needed to see this through. Needed to prove to myself that I could stand in the same room with her and remain unchanged. I walked to her table. "Hello, Victoria." She looked up. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. Then her eyes widened and something crumbled in her face. "Emma, you're a long way from Boston." I saw you were speaking at this conference. I bought a ticket." I sat down slowly, keeping the table between us. "Why?" "I wanted to see you, to talk to you." "You have 5 minutes." She flinched like I'd struck her. Good. She should understand that my time was no longer negotiable. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice broke. "For everything, for how we treated you, for not seeing what we had, for not being the mother you deserved." I waited. There had to be more. "Your father is probably going to prison. We've lost everything, the house, our savings, our reputation. And Lily is so fragile. She can't handle stress. She needs stability, support. She needs—" "Money," I finished. "You came here to ask me for money." "No. Yes, I don't know." She pressed her hands to her face. "I came here because I looked at my life, and I realized that the only person who turned out well, who built something real, was the one we treated the worst. And I wanted to understand how you did it." "I left," I said simply. "I stopped trying to earn something you were never going to give me. I stopped making myself small so Lily could feel big. I stopped accepting crumbs and pretending they were meals. We didn't mean to. Yes, you did. Maybe not consciously. But every choice you made said the same thing. Lily mattered, and I didn't. You wanted me to be grateful for the table scraps while you gave her the feast. And I was for too long. But not anymore." Victoria was crying now, silent tears tracking through expensive makeup that couldn't hide her exhaustion. "What can I do?" "Nothing. There's nothing you can do. The time for doing something was 18 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Now Now you live with the consequences of your choices, just like I've lived with the consequences of mine. Do you hate us? I considered the question honestly. No. Hate would mean you still had power over my emotions. I'm just done. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt. I'm just finished. So, you won't help Lily? There it was, the real reason she'd come. Lily is an adult. She has access to the same resources I did, the ability to work, to build a life, to grow. What she doesn't have is your money and your enabling. That's not my problem to solve. She's not strong like you. She was never given the chance to become strong because you cushioned every fall. You wanted her to be perfect so badly that you never taught her how to handle imperfection. That's your failure as a parent, not her failure as a person. But it's also not my responsibility to fix. Victoria's face crumpled. I don't know what to do. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in 25 years. I stood up. I hope you figure it out, I really do. But I can't help you. I won't. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard her voice, small and broken. Emma? I stopped but didn't turn around. I'm proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am. You're remarkable. I let the words hang there for a moment, examining how they felt. Empty. 20 years too late and 3 years too little. I didn't need her pride anymore. I had my own. Goodbye, Victoria, I said, and walked away. In the elevator, alone, I checked my reflection in the polished doors. Clear eyes, steady hands, a face that belonged to me, shaped by choices I'd made, displaying emotions I'd earned. I didn't destroy them. I outgrew them. The next morning, I had breakfast with Owen, told him about the encounter with my mother. He listened carefully, the way he always did, and then took my hand across the table. How do you feel? Free, I said, and realised it was completely true. For the first time, I feel completely free. She came looking for the daughter who would save them, and that person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. You saved yourself instead. I did. I smiled at him, and it turns out that was enough. We flew back to Boston that afternoon. Our research was entering a crucial phase, human trials that could change treatment protocols for degenerative diseases. The work that had once been about rewriting my own death had become about preventing others from suffering the same fate. The purpose had evolved, matured, just like I had. 3 weeks later, our trial results exceeded every projection. The therapy worked. Actually worked. We had patients regaining function, rebuilding damaged tissue, living fuller lives. The pharmaceutical partnership we'd signed would make the treatment accessible to thousands, eventually millions. The day the results published, my phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, researchers, journalists wanting interviews. In the midst of them, one number I didn't recognise. I almost deleted it. Then something made me open it. It was from Lily. Emma, I saw the news about your research. Mum told me she saw you in New York. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better and I was too selfish to see it. I hope you're happy. You should be. What you're doing is amazing. I read it 3 times, looking for manipulation, for hidden requests, for anything that felt like the old patterns. But it was just an apology. Simple. Probably painful for her to write. Not asking for forgiveness, just acknowledging harm. I thought about responding. Thought about all the things I could say. The hurts I could list, the moments I could dissect, the blame I could assign. But what would be the point? She was fighting her own battles now, learning her own lessons. My forgiveness or lack of it wouldn't change her path. Only she could do that. Instead, I saved the message and set my phone down. Maybe someday I'd respond. Maybe I wouldn't. The beautiful thing was, I didn't have to decide right now. I had time. All the time I'd given myself by choosing to live for me instead of dying slowly in their shadow. That evening, Owen and I walked along the Charles River, watching the sun set over the water. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, and the air smelled like autumn and possibility. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if things were different?" he asked. "If they'd loved you the way you deserved?" I considered it. In my first life, I'd asked myself that question constantly. Tortured myself with what-ifs and if-onlys. But now, no, I said, because if they had loved me differently, I might never have learned to love myself. I might have stayed comfortable in their world, never pushed myself to become who I actually am. Their neglect was cruel, but it also set me free in a way acceptance never would have. That's a generous way to see it. It's not generosity, it's just the truth. I don't forgive them, and I don't forget. But I also don't let them define me anymore, not through their presence and not through their absence. He pulled me closer, and we stood there watching the river flow, always moving forward, never looking back, carrying its current towards something larger than itself. I thought about the girl I'd been, desperate and small and dying for love. I thought about the woman I'd become, whole and powerful and entirely my own. The distance between them was measured not in years, but in choices. Every moment I'd chosen myself, I'd moved further from who they wanted me to be and closer to who I actually was. My victory was never revenge. It was never making them see what they'd lost or feel what they'd done. My victory was becoming untouchable, building a life so full and meaningful that their opinion of it, good or bad, simply didn't matter anymore. And standing there by the river, my hand in Owen's, my future spreading before me like the water meeting the horizon, I finally understood. I hadn't just survived them. I had transcended them entirely.